Hey everybody, it's Jen. I'm back for another episode of Spiritual Living Today, and I can't believe that this is actually the 10th episode. This last 10 weeks has just flown by, and I hope you guys are really enjoying this podcast. I'm actually really enjoying doing the podcast, so I'm hoping that it's helpful for you and that you're enjoying all of the different almost like mini lessons. I'll have to say, guys, even after I record these, I've been doing my own journaling and my own going even deeper into the topics that I already teach on. So I've really been enjoying it. I hope it's helpful for you as much as it is for me. And I just wanted to let you know that I've decided that I'm going to break this into seasons. So this will be the 10th episode, which will be the completion of season 1, which is spring of 2023. So we've talked about dogma. We've talked about really living intuitively, like one step at a time. I did talk about ridicule and rejection, which I think is really going to be important over the next few years. Really diving deeper into spirituality and what that means for you, and then also mindfulness and being intentional. Everything, you guys, that we've gone over so far in this season is so timely and so important during the Saturn and Pisces that we're in right now, not to mention some of the bigger adjustments that we're all going through with Pluto and Aquarius and just in general what we're going through as a collective at this time. So really be aware of discernment and discipline. Again, that was episode 6, and then spiritual hygiene, episode 7. Permission work, that was so powerful for me, even though I've done that before. And I've literally had times where I've called a girlfriend and just said, look, I really want to do this, but I'm struggling. Just say I have permission. Sometimes just hearing that out loud helps you create a shift. And that's part of being in the frequency that we're in, right? Sometimes we need to remember that this is a vibrational experience, and the frequency is much more important now than it was previously, like even 5 years ago, right? And that's bringing us into understanding that we really are set apart when we're on this spiritual path. Of course, we're connected to the collective, but we have to set ourselves apart in the way that we think, believe, act, in the way we do life, right? And that leads me into today's podcast, and what I want to cover for this episode is what it really is like when you're moving from 3D into 5D. So everything is becoming much more about vibration and frequency. And even people that wouldn't quote unquote say that they're spiritually awake, or maybe they're having their awakening now, or they're going through the process now. And even those of us who feel like we've been doing spiritual work forever, right? It is a different experience on this planet right now. The way that things have always been, the 3D experience of being on this planet is no longer. It's falling away. There's enough of the collective now that is awakened to at least 4D frequency. So now a lot of us are able to experience 5D, and some even beyond that, like some beyond into 7D, and I mean all the way up to 12D. One of the meditations that I did in I think it was last year, it might have been 2021, I did a 12th dimension Christ-light meditation. So, and that was in the Ascension Club membership group, but that meditation was really pulling in even more energy from the 12th dimension, which is Christ consciousness, in that it's bringing that energy to be available for us to start working with now in 5D frequency. So just know that as we move into the higher frequencies, this is really a new way of being, right? So when we're moving from 3D to 5D, the way we've always done things isn't going to work anymore. Like plain and simple, it's just not going to be the same. So there's kind of a progression as we go through this. And I just want to say, like, this is not end all be all, right? Anything in this podcast, these are little snips. I'm trying to keep everything short and sweet and to the point, because I know there's so much going on, and there's so much, again, energy and frequency and so much vibration, and so there's so much wanting our attention right now, right? So I'm trying to keep all of these podcasts under 20 minutes. That's my goal for these, is to give you something tangible that you can actually take action on, but also, have that spiritual growth aspect to it. So just know that all of this stuff that I'm offering in this podcast is not end all be all. This is a general overview of how things are working in the spiritual realms, right? So that being said, as we think about the energetics behind the 3D theme that most of us have grown up with, right? This 3D has been life is hard. You have to work hard to get ahead. A lot of us have felt like we're a slave to the human experience, right? I'm a slave to this human life. I'm a slave to my work. I'm a slave to the earth experience. This is like when you're a starseed and you're like, I just wish they would come get me and take me home, right? Like, or not feeling like you belong on the earth, or it's just too hard to be here. That is a 3D experience. And it made sense because the vibrational frequency from our soul essence, which is multidimensionality, it's really hard to be in a 3D experience because it's so just, it's a heavy experience. 3D is heavy, right? We might even be feeling like survival of the fittest when we're in that 3D experience. And that would be a typical part of 3D. I think probably everybody listening to this can experience or can relate to that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not quite to that dramatics, but definitely that life is hard kind of frequency is what 3D was. Now, some people are still living in that. And I've talked about this also on the membership group, that we're in this flux right now where 3D, 4D, and 5D are all present at the same time. And so we're kind of fluctuating between all of the three different levels of experience that are available to us on the planet right now. So for 3D, there's a lot of people still stuck in that completely, nose to the grindstone, trying to get to work. That's all they do, right? It's like they're working hard to work hard to work hard. And that is 3D, right? Being so busy that you don't have anything else, that you don't have time to experience anything else. You don't have time to experience anything peaceful or anything. Like, I remember those days of just feeling like life was hard. I think in a nutshell, that's a pretty good overview of 3D. Now, when you adjust into 4D, this is when people, you start your awakening, right? You start your spiritual journey, your spiritual growth. You start looking for the deeper meaning in life. You maybe start to realize that the way you think about things, you start to wonder, why do I feel that way? Why do I think that way? And you maybe start to understand that the way you think about things, the beliefs that you have, really do impact your reality, your daily life, right? This is where you begin to understand that duality is prevalent, right? Like, there's light and dark, up and down, good and bad. Like, the duality becomes a lot more at the forefront, and you understand it differently, and you probably have more compassion and less judgment, right? Because 3D, there's a lot of judgment too. There's a lot of, this is the way things are, this is the way you're supposed to do things. If you don't do things quote unquote right, you're not doing things the right way, right? So 4D is where a lot of healing comes in. This is a lot of growth. This is a lot more compassion starts to come in. You start to actually question yourself and why you do the things you do. And you start realizing the programs, patterns, and paradigms that you were raised with, right? That you have just naturally brought into your life because of that's the way people did things, right? And so you start questioning, wait a minute, why do we do this? If this is the way things are done, and these are the way we've always done things, why? Like, why are we doing this? And this is what my guides are dropping in right now to kind of explain 4D. There's a story, and I don't know where I heard this, so I apologize for not giving it the proper credit, but I remember hearing this story one time of this lady that she was young, she got married, she was making a roast, and she cut the end of the roast off and then made the roast for dinner, and she threw the other piece away, and her husband's like, why do you do that every time you make a roast? Like, why do you cut the end off before you bake it? Why don't you just cook the whole roast? And she's like, I don't know, that's the way we've always done it. So she called her mom, and her mom's like, well, I don't know, that's just the way grandma always did it. So she calls her grandma, and her grandma's like, I didn't have a big enough pan to put a whole roast in there, so I always had to cut a piece off of it to fit it in the pan. So they were totally, there was no real reason to cut off the roast unless it just didn't fit in the pan. But they had carried that on for generations just because, quote unquote, that's the way we do it. So 4D is where you're like, why are we cutting this off? Like, what's the purpose of this, right? And it's funny because I remember when when I heard that story, it made me think about the bread. And so this is like when you buy a loaf of bread, one of the habits that I always had that Jim was like, why do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just what I've always done. Was taking the piece of bread. So like, you know, when you open a loaf of bread, the end of it is the heel, right? Well, we would leave the heel, like take the next couple pieces out, put the heel back in, and then tie the zip tie back on and seal the loaf of bread back up. And I hadn't ever thought about it until I heard that story. And when I heard that story, I was like, that's why we do that. Because I bet when grandma used to make bread, they didn't really have a plastic bag of bread. And so that bread kept the moisture in the rest of the loaf, right? So the heel had a purpose. And that's why you did it. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that when you're buying a loaf of bread now because it comes packaged with plastic and it'll stay sealed up and nice and moist, right? So it was really interesting. And that's kind of a light way of looking at the transition into 4D. You start asking yourself and wondering why you do the things you do, why you believe the things that you believe. This is where my book, Embodied Grace, A Woman's Path to Empowerment, comes in, because you start being really intentional about what you're doing in your life. You start listening to the nasty little mean girl in your head and you're like, wait a minute, why do I believe that? Why do I believe I'm not good enough? Why do I believe I'm not worthy? Why do I believe like I shouldn't try to do these amazing things, right? So that's the 4D, is when you really start, you're basically looking for deeper meaning, right? You start your spiritual journey. Now, as we move into 5D, the 5D is when you get into a state where you just allow yourself to be, right? This state allows you to deepen your personal healing. It allows you to go deeper into your spiritual growth. It allows you to understand things from an esoteric point of view. The mysteries of the universe don't seem quite so mysterious anymore, right? And you really drop the judgments. Now, this is something that I know I've worked with a lot of my clients before. Judgment and discernment are totally different things. When you're discerning something, you're deciding or judging if it's for you and if it's not. But when you're judging, you're judging what other people are doing, right? So there's a discernment of, that is not what I want to do. But when you move into 5D, it's almost like the judgments just drop, because you understand that all experiences are valuable and that everything's valuable for your own soul growth. And even if you don't agree with the way things somebody else is doing, they have the ability and the free will to have that experience for themselves. And again, it's soul growth, right? We know that authenticity is the best way to be, and that trying to quote unquote make somebody do something or quote unquote make somebody see it your way has no value. That's again 3D, trying to make somebody see it your way so that they understand why they're doing something. No, you can't force somebody into that. That's a 3D thing. If you're trying to force somebody, then you're toggling probably between 3D and 4D. And again, there's no judgment in that. This is just simply saying this is kind of the progression of the way things go. So when you're in 5D, you know that love is the answer. And this is where you begin to feel connected. And it's almost indescribable to say the way that you're connected to, not only collectively, right, but to the earth in general. You start to have a different appreciation of even the earth and the flowers and the trees. Like my husband used to laugh. He said, you give a whole new meaning to the word tree hugger, because you commune with the trees. You can literally listen to the trees and glean knowledge from the trees if you're in that space that you're open. And that's where 5D is so beautiful. You really are understanding that there's not really good and bad experiences. It's all valuable in this human life, this human experience, right? And you also, like in 5Ds, where you start realizing that you're not only on this planet, but you're also connected to the stars and then the galaxies, right? There's so much more available to us. As you move into the 5D, and when you start to lock in 5D frequency, you realize that there is no such thing as competition. Like, the universe is all about abundance, and there is more than enough for everyone, right? Now, that's not saying that you won't have experiences that maybe would have been deemed as bad in the past. Like, you may have thought, well, this isn't really how I wanted to experience something. But in 5D, you understand that some of these experiences are fated, and it's really more important about how you respond versus the experience in general, right? Like, it's really about the way you're responding to life and allowing yourself to be in ebb and flow. And in 5D, you really understand that your words and your thoughts hold power, and they create your reality. So it's really a beautiful place to be. And don't feel bad, like, if you're toggling between, right? Because that's part of the growth. Part of the growth is 3D to 4D. You're going to toggle between the two because you're learning a new phase, right? You're learning a new way of being. And then again, when you're in 4D into 5D, you're learning a new way of being. So you're going to toggle between the two. And don't think that if you're in 5D, there won't be a day that knocks you back into 3D, right? But what you can do there is you understand that from that perspective, you remember that you have a solid spiritual connection and you can connect with your guides and angels, so you can bring yourself back out of 3D much easier, right? I do want to say the more spiritual discipline you have, the more you understand your boundaries, the more you can maintain 5D frequency and hold that space of unconditional love, right? So the more you practice that, the easier it becomes, and the less you're going to toggle in between. And once you get 5D locked in, guys, this is where you're limitless. Like, this is where you really begin to understand that there's so much more to this reality, that there is mystical and beautiful and amazing, profound influences that, like, govern our lives and govern the universe and the galaxies. And it's so beautiful and amazing. And this is where frequency and vibration become much more dominant in your life. So there's so much, you guys, that I want to cover as we move forward in this podcast. I hope you're enjoying this. I feel like that's a great place to end for this season. So sending you guys lots of love, and I will chat with you again this summer.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to grab the free downloadable resources for this episode. You can find the details in the show notes.
Remember that Jennifer offers an app, a variety of online courses, as well as private VIP coaching and mentorship. You can find out more about this on her website at jenniferlonnberg.com.